Welcome back to Explorer. I want to thank you for watching. It is interesting that the geopolitical landscape has shifted within the past 2 months. It's interesting. The country of Ukraine has come to the realization that the United States is not a strategic partner like they thought. Why am I making this video? Here we talk geopolitics on how the continent of Africa engage its strategic partners from around the world. It is important that Ukraine is about to learn the hard way, the way that the continent of Africa have been learning that its strategic partners from around the world are looking for one particular thing. There is no free money. Africa, I want you to wake up to understand how we engage, we strategize, how we work alongside, how we partner, that the Western partners have nothing for free. Ukraine will pay in one way or the other. If you look at Ukraine is in a tight spot at the moment, strategically and geopolitical engagement. From the economic perspective and looking at how Ukraine is figuring out what it needs to do at this critical time in the Ukrainian history. Donald Trump has made it clear Ukraine has no other option at the moment. Ukraine will pay with its natural resources. Does that sound familiar to Africa? All of these billions of US dollars that were being flooded to the country of Ukraine, we all saw that in the news. United States giving Ukraine hundreds of millions of dollars. Nobody talked on why this money was going through and how would this money be paid back. But the changes in the landscape in the geopolitical environment should wake up the continent of Africa. That you African countries have no friends. You have actual partners to deal with. It's clear that Ukraine understands what African countries have been talking about. Ukraine would have to pay back the United States of America with its natural resources. This is fundamentally unheard of at this particular stage. Ukraine, the darling of the European Union, in terms of the strategic engagement, I was wondering how Joe Biden at the time was throwing all of these billions of euros and dollars to the country of Ukraine. One thing was running through my head, like, how will Ukraine pay this money? Where will this construction money come from? Is this billions of dollars for free? I think to an extent, Joe Biden was just basically focusing on helping the country of Ukraine to resist Russia, a mighty superpower of its own.
Kiev and Washington have reportedly agreed to the terms of a draft minerals and resources deal. The agreement could be signed as early as Friday, with plans for Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky to travel to the United States to meet with Donald Trump. The U.S. president has been demanding Ukraine give access to its rare earth minerals in what Trump calls payback for wartime aid provided by the U.S. under Joe Biden.
$1 billion. That I hear that he's coming on Friday. Certainly, it's okay with me if he'd like to, and he would like to sign it together with me. And I understand that's a big deal, very big deal. And I think the American people, even if you look at polling, they're very happy because Biden was throwing money around like it's cotton candy, and it's a very big deal. It could be $1 trillion deal. It could be whatever.
So before the pens are drawn and the deal is done, let's take a look at exactly what we know about these mineral resources that suddenly seem so central to the future of Ukraine.
Fighting near a Ukrainian village on the front lines last year. Tank battles raged above ground that geologists estimate holds hundreds of millions of dollars of lithium. That's just one of the resources that Ukraine has significant deposits of. There are also deposits of graphite, titanium, zirconium, and rare earth metals spread across Ukraine. Some in the areas controlled by Russia, but much in the territory Ukraine itself still controls. Potentially worth more than $10 trillion, making Ukraine potentially a very rich country. The White House sent the Treasury Secretary to Ukraine to sign a deal. An alleged leaked draft said the U.S. would get half the money Ukraine earns from mining, as well as oil and gas resources, ports, and other infrastructure.
But I was asking myself, all of this money that was being poured into the country of Ukraine, how will it be recovered? How will the United States benefit from this particular support that is given to Ukraine? Sometimes it's unbelievable how geopolitical partners can throw something out there using words like support, our partner, we have to stand with you, we have to support you. But we're not talking about the financial implications of this particular relationship. That's why Ukraine is learning from the difficult angles. Africa, never you ever open your hands or looking for handouts from your strategic partner. Question every deal, every relationship that you find yourself. The world has shifted. It is changed. Ukraine is learning that the United States of America is not as strategic a partner as they thought. Let's roll the clip.
The Trump deal has been compared to the Treaty of Versailles imposed on Germany after it lost World War I, which forced Germany to pay what would now be hundreds of billions of dollars in reparations. The amount Ukraine would end up paying is far greater in adjusted terms, despite the fact that Russia is the aggressor in the current war. The Trump team sees minerals as compensation for past and possible future aid. Ukraine sees its mineral wealth as its path forward to rebuilding after the war eventually ends. Ukraine can't afford to alienate the US and lose its backing, but fears that without security guarantees against further Russian aggression, it might get nothing in return for signing away its wealth.
Let's bring in DW correspondent Nick Connolly from Kyiv. Nick, what more do we know about what the parties have reportedly agreed to at this point?
Nicole, it is very difficult. There are lots of competing reports, most of them based on briefings, unnamed officials, very few kind of officials coming out with their names and talking about detail. So I think we have to kind of foreground those doubts. But seemingly it has been possible for the Ukrainians to firstly get rid of that $500 billion figure that was kind of floating around. That was what Trump and his team were saying that Ukraine owed the United States. Obviously, Ukraine has always stressed that it received only about ballpark $100 billion in US aid since the beginning of this war, so that was obviously a huge difference there. It also seems that they've basically kicked the kind of details of how America is going to get money from this down the line and say that's going to be kind of something to be agreed in future through future agreements. And basically, all we've kind of heard so far is that 50% of the revenues from new projects in oil, gas, rare earth metals, critical minerals will be put into a fund, and what the Americans get out of those 50% we don't know yet. I think at this point it's a face-saving, obviously, effort. The Ukrainians don't want to risk another kind of falling out with the Americans like we had last week when Donald Trump called Zelensky a dictator. But equally, they are very clear. We had Zelensky saying recently he doesn't want to sign a deal that will take 10 generations for Ukraine to pay back.
Why am I worried about the continent of Africa? Africa is talking about that the current president of the United States, Donald Trump, have cut off aid. That's normal. There's nothing wrong with that. This is a fundamental period where Africa must engage, re-strategize, like I've pointed out in previous videos, figure out what partnership works and which does not. And the US's decision, executive orders from the current president, Mr. Donald Trump, it's God-sent, simple. Let's put it that way from the strategic point of view. It is about time we go back to the drawing board and re-engage our partners from an angle of sovereignty, of an angle of strength. Ukraine at this moment would have never thought that the United States of America will come swinging. That it's about time you sign those documents. Ukraine's president will be traveling to the United States of America to talk about its natural resources. And this is basically like, you need to talk about it. There's no other way. Africa, your situation is not so bad. Ukraine is currently understanding that there's been a shift in the United States of America. The landscape has changed. The next 4 years is going to be brutal. Like I said, geopolitics is a brutal game, and Africa must wake up.
Is there a sense that Ukraine got what it wanted?
I think it's a bit early to say that. I think until this is signed, until we see the text, I would be a little careful about saying that. There's been so much turbulence about this. We've heard so many extraordinary stories of Zelensky supposedly shouting at the US Treasury Secretary who arrived in Kiev 2 weeks ago, expecting him to sign on the dotted line immediately without any option for Ukraine to negotiate. But certainly we have seen that Ukraine has stood its ground and has called out Donald Trump, said, Zelensky saying that Trump is surrounded by Russian disinformation, hasn't basically withered under the pressure. So there is a sense that while Ukraine wants to obviously maintain its links to Washington, it is not rolling over immediately every time there's a kind of tweet or a Truth Social post from the White House.
Zelensky and Trump have traded sharp rhetoric in the past. You mentioned it before. Trump called Zelensky a dictator. Do you expect that to change after their reported meeting on Friday?
So that obviously has been a kind of big topic here in Ukraine, the idea that Zelensky has to meet Trump before Putin does, and that hopefully that personal connection and that personal meeting will allow him to get past some of the kind of negativity of recent weeks. We simply don't know. Obviously, this agreement doesn't include clear security guarantees that the Ukrainians wanted. We've heard the Ukrainians saying that the Americans are saying this is all part of a bigger picture, and also the Americans seem convinced that if there is big American investment in Ukrainian resources, that suddenly, somehow, the Russians will not invade. Again, the Ukrainians aren't convinced by that. They say there was big American investment in Ukraine, maybe not on this current scale, but before 2014. That didn't stop the Russians coming then. So I think this is all part of a bigger negotiation, and I think there's a sense here that, just sign something that doesn't have too many commitments and hope that changes the tone.
That's DW correspondent Nick Connolly reporting from Kyiv. Thank you so much.
What should be going into the head of the Ukrainian government and the Ukrainian officials and nationals? It baffles me at this time, because the United States, as a very strategic partner during Joe Biden's term, all of this money that was being flooded to this country from the European Union, we saw how the French president actually corrected the current America's president on terms of their engagement and discussions concerning the NATO contribution or support to the country of Ukraine. My question I'm asking here is, will the European Union, will the EU go ahead and ask Ukraine to pay also with the natural resources? That's the big question. How will this partnership move forward? This is a big lesson for global nations, Africa in particular, that the United States will not give you anything for free. Hopefully the Ukrainian people can navigate this particular difficult time in their history. At this moment, it is unbelievable that your geopolitical partners can hamstring you. Like I pointed out, Donald Trump is using incredible leverage. And that's the reason why Ukraine have no option than to dance to the American tune. I will be looking forward to meeting you soon in our next episode. Have a good day. Bye-bye.